When Lila first mentioned taking a cooking class together, I pictured something out of one of those overly curated Instagram reels. Two people laughing in soft lighting as they stirred, chopped, and taste-tested their way to culinary brilliance. The flyer she'd found promised a hands-on Moroccan feast, complete with spices we'd never heard of and techniques we definitely didn't know. I was in. The evening of the class, the space was buzzing with couples and friends. Each workstation had a perfectly laid-out array of ingredients, pots, and knives that looked so sharp they could perform surgery. The instructor, Khalid, greeted us warmly, explaining that tonight we'd be crafting a chicken tagine with preserved lemons and a side of zeylauk, an eggplant and tomato dip that he assured us would transport our taste buds to Marrakesh. He spoke with the kind of reverence that made cooking feel like a sacred ritual. I love it already. Lila nudged me as Khalid walked away. So, think you'll stick to the rules? She teased. I shot her a look. She was referring to my tendency to treat recipes like the law, while she treated them like vague suggestions. This isn't about rules, I said with mock seriousness. It's about respect for the craft. She laughed and twirled the provided apron dramatically. Respect this, Chef Ramsay. The trouble started almost immediately. Khalid demonstrated how to peel the charred skin off the roasted eggplant, explaining the importance of texture. I, of course, followed suit, carefully removing every last blackened bit. Lila, meanwhile, decided the charring added character and barely peeled hers at all. It's rustic, she said when I raised an eyebrow. It's messy, I countered. She shrugged, smearing the eggplant into her bowl like an artist with a palette knife. Next came the spices. Khalid warned us that balance was everything in Moroccan cooking. A pinch too much cinnamon, and the entire dish could veer into dessert territory. As I measured out teaspoons of cumin and paprika with a precision that would have made my high school chemistry teacher proud, I noticed Lila shaking the spice jars directly in her pot like she was casting a spell. Eyeballing it, I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She grinned. I'm feeling inspired. The zeylauk went into the oven, and we moved on to the main event, the chicken tagine. Khalid handed each pair a small jar of preserved lemons, their skins wrinkled and glossy from months of curing in brine. This, he said, holding one up like a jewel, is the soul of the dish. Use them wisely. I nodded, reverently slicing mine into thin strips. Lila, however, popped a piece in her mouth and winced. Oh my God, it's so salty, she said loudly enough that Khalid glanced over. They're not meant to be eaten straight, I whispered, mortified. I was curious, she shot back, laughing. It wasn't just the preserved lemons. By the time we were supposed to sear the chicken, Lila had already added hers to the pot, skipping several steps and effectively braising it. You're going rogue, I muttered, half joking. I'm improvising, she said with a flourish. It's jazz cooking, I sighed, focusing on my own perfectly seared chicken thighs, golden and crisp. When we reached the final step, layering everything into the tagine and letting it simmer, Khalid walked by to inspect our progress. He smiled politely at Lila's pot, which looked like a fever dream of spices and half-dissolved vegetables. Very bold, he said. At mine, he nodded approvingly, inhaling deeply. Excellent control of flavor, he said, before moving on. Lila shot me a look. Teacher's pet, she muttered under her breath. Finally, it was time to eat. We sat across from each other at one of the long communal tables, our respective dishes steaming in front of us. I served myself a neat portion of my tagine, savoring the balance of savory and tangy flavors. It was good, really good. Lila, meanwhile, took a bite of hers and frowned slightly. It's different, she said, poking at a chunk of undercooked carrot. I couldn't help but smirk. Rustic? I asked. She rolled her eyes, but laughed, begrudgingly taking another bite. Okay, maybe I got a little carried away, she admitted. But yours is boring. Where's the drama? The drama, I said, pointing at her bowl, is that yours might give you food poisoning. By the time we were helping ourselves to dessert, honey-drenched pastries Khalid had made earlier, the tension had mostly melted away. Still, as we walked home, the conversation turned back to our wildly different approaches. You were so rigid, Lila said, shaking her head. It's cooking, not rocket science. And you, I countered, were treating it like finger painting. She laughed, bumping my shoulder with hers. Maybe I just wanted to make it fun. And maybe I just wanted to get it right, I replied. We fell into a comfortable silence, the city lights reflecting off the puddles on the pavement. I glanced at her and added, "So, who do you think Khalid liked more?" She snorted. "Oh, definitely me." He said my dish was bold. "You're just forgettable." We both laughed, but as I lie here now, replaying the night in my head, I wonder if I was too much of a stickler or if she was too careless. Maybe the whole point wasn't to make the perfect tagine, but to enjoy doing it together. Still, it's hard to say if I was wrong to want things done right, or if she was right to want to make it her own. When the email arrived, it felt like a secret handshake from the universe. 2 tickets to the underground theater debut of Ashen Night, a play so elusive it had become part myth, part cult obsession. Not just any play. This was immersive theater at its peak, a performance that supposedly made audiences forget themselves entirely. Finn and I had talked about it for years, swapping rumors about its eerie, shifting plot, and the actors who never broke character. I called Finn immediately. "We're going," I said breathlessly, not even pausing for hello. "We're finally going." Finn's laugh spilled through the line, warm and electric. "You're kidding. No way. Are we really doing this?" "Yes, really," I shouted. "And we're going all in?" "I'm talking full immersion. Costumes, pre-show cocktails at some shadowy bar. First in line, so we're pulled right into the story." Finn's response was instant, familiar. "First in line? Why? The play starts when it starts, Jules. Why waste energy waiting? Besides, aren't these things better when they unravel naturally?" I pinched the bridge of my nose, smiling despite myself. Finn, my partner in crime, my fellow obsessive, always had this maddening way of sidestepping the frenzy. It was part of what I loved about them, and part of what drove me absolutely bonkers. "We have to be there early," I argued. "You know how these things work. The more committed you seem, the deeper they'll pull you in. The actors might single us out. We could become part of the narrative." Or, Finn countered, "we could chill, walk in 15 minutes before curtain, and let the show do its thing. Why would we force it? Half the fun is seeing where the night takes us." And just like that, the fissure opened between us. For the next few days, we danced around the disagreement, each trying to tug the other toward our version of the perfect night. I explained, maybe a little too fervently, that arriving early wasn't just about logistics. It was about soaking in the anticipation, the way it thickened the air and set the stage. Finn, in turn, painted this romantic picture of breezing in just before the doors closed, unburdened and ready for the unexpected. "You're trying to choreograph chaos," they teased me. "You're treating it like it's a matinee," I shot back. By the time the night arrived, we'd cobbled together an awkward compromise. I'd get us to the venue early, but Finn would set the pace once we were inside. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best we could do. We arrived at the theater an hour before doors opened, and the alley outside was already alive with shadowy energy. The building itself looked like something from a fever dream. Twisting ironwork, flickering lights, and an unmarked entrance guarded by a figure in a plague doctor mask. Other guests milled about, their costumes ranging from vintage elegance to outright macabre. I was buzzing, high on the atmosphere, but Finn leaned against the wall with their hands stuffed in their pockets, their expression caught somewhere between amusement and impatience. "You have to admit, this is incredible," I whispered, gesturing to a group of masked actors prowling through the crowd. Finn schmirket. "Sure, but we could have walked in 30 minutes from now and gotten the same effect." I ignored them, focusing instead on the way the actors moved. How one of them seemed to glance at us, linger a little too long before slipping away. My heart raced. When we finally entered the theater, it was like stepping into another world. The air was thick with smoke and whispers, the rooms unfolding like a labyrinth. Actors brushed past us, murmuring cryptic phrases and darting off before we could respond. I wanted to chase them, to peel back every layer of the story, but Finn hung back, content to let the scenes wash over them. At one point, I grabbed their hand and pulled them toward a darkened corridor, where a woman in a tattered gown was reciting poetry to a flickering candle. "Come on, we have to follow her," I whispered. Finn resisted, their grip on my hand firm. "Or we could stay here," they said. "Look around. There's more going on than just her." I bristled, torn between dragging them along and leaving them behind. But the hesitation cost me. The woman disappeared into the shadows, taking her story with her. The night continued like that, a series of near misses and compromises. I'd chase after one actor while Finn lingered in another room, their curiosity drawn by some seemingly minor detail, a discarded glove, a fragment of conversation. They seemed content to drift, while I ached to plunge headfirst into the chaos. By the time the play ended, we were both exhilarated and exhausted, but the tension lingered. As we walked back to the car, I finally broke the silence. "So, was it worth it?" I asked, trying to keep the sharpness out of my voice. Finn shrugged, a half-smile playing on their lips. "It was incredible, but I think I got more out of it by letting it come to me. You were trying too hard to control it, Jules. You miss things." "Miss things?" I snapped. "You stood still half the time. There were entire storylines you didn't even try to follow. And there were moments you missed because you were too busy running after the next big thing." Finn shot back, their voice calm but pointed. We both fell silent, the weight of the night settling over us. And now, days later, I'm left wondering, was I selfish for dragging Finn into my whirlwind, insisting on a version of the night that suited me? Or were they selfish for refusing to meet me in the frenzy, for holding back when I needed them to dive in? We both saw the play, but it feels like we experienced two completely different worlds. I'll be honest, I didn't think it was going to be a big deal. If I had, I wouldn't have done it. Well, probably not. My sister, Jess, is the creative one in the family. The kind who wears mismatched earrings and calls it a statement, who sees a crack in the sidewalk and calls it art. You know the type. She's always been this way, even as a kid. While I was trying to figure out how to beat the boss in Zelda, Jess was turning toilet paper rolls into puppets and scribbling poems in a notebook she guarded like it was the launch codes for a nuclear bomb. That notebook was the beginning of the thing that caused all this mess. Jess called it her thoughts sanctuary, which, yes, is as pretentious as it sounds. But it worked for her. Over the years, her sanctuary turned into a series of journals. Leather-bound, spiral, moleskins, even one of those ugly neon things you get for back-to-school sales. Each one was full of sketches, half-written poems, to-do lists, ticket stubs, pressed flowers, and God knows what else. She never let anyone read them. Except once. About 6 months ago, she was drunk, like loudly reciting Keats in the middle of our living room drunk, and she let me look at one. I was careful, flipping through the pages slowly like I was holding something sacred, and honestly, it was incredible. Her handwriting was wild and messy, the sketches sometimes blending into the words. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. She kept saying, "This is my soul, bro," and laughing, but I could tell she meant it. Which is why, when I borrowed one without asking last weekend, I figured she wouldn't mind. It wasn't for anything weird. My girlfriend, Mia, is taking a creative writing class, and she'd been in a rut, complaining that nothing she wrote felt alive. I thought showing her one of Jess's journals might inspire her. Mia loves that kind of raw, unfiltered stuff. I remembered how mesmerized I'd been when I saw Jess's scribbles, and I thought it might have the same effect on Mia. Jess was out of town for a week visiting some friends upstate, so it seemed like perfect timing. I went to her apartment, used the spare keys she'd given me for emergencies. Is this an emergency? Debatable. And found the shelf where she keeps her journals. It was like picking a wine bottle. I looked for one with the most personality, something battered, thick, and overstuffed with loose papers poking out. Bingo. I brought it over to Mia's place that night, explaining how Jess's journals were basically treasure chests of creativity. Mia was hesitant at first, asking if Jess was okay with me borrowing it, but I waved her off. She'd be fine with it. I lied. It's not like she even uses these anymore. They're just collecting dust. We cracked it open, and Mia was immediately enchanted. She ran her fingers over Jess's chaotic scrawls, her eyes wide like she'd just stumbled onto a lost Shakespeare folio. She read random snippets out loud, laughing at Jess's sarcastic commentary on life and crying at a poem about losing our dad. "This is incredible," Mia said. "Your sister's a genius." I felt pretty proud of myself. Not only had I impressed Mia, but I'd also shown her a piece of my sister's brilliance. That had to count as a win, right? The problem came the next day. Mia wanted to bring the journal to her class to share with her professor, who, she claimed, had an eye for brilliance. I wasn't sure about that. Jess wouldn't like her work being shown to strangers. But Mia was so excited, and I didn't want to be a buzzkill. I made her promise to keep it safe and not let it out of her sight, and she swore up and down that she'd guard it with her life. She didn't. She left the journal in her car while she ran into a coffee shop after class. It was just for 10 minutes, she said, but that was all it took. When she came back, her passenger side window was shattered and the journal was gone. Someone had stolen her laptop bag, and Jess's journal had been inside. I couldn't believe it. I wanted to scream at Mia, but what good would that do? I was the one who took it in the first place. This was my fault. My stomach churned as I imagined Jess's face when she found out. I tried to convince myself that maybe the thief would toss the journal once they realized it wasn't valuable. Maybe someone would find it and return it. But I knew deep down that was a pipe dream. Jess came back from her trip on Sunday, and I went over that evening to tell her the truth. I thought it would be better to come clean in person, to face the music and show her how sorry I was. It didn't go well. At first, she didn't understand. "Which journal?" she asked, her brow furrowed. I described it, and her face went pale. "You mean the red one? With the gold clasp?" I nodded, already regretting everything. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she said, her voice shaking. I started to explain, but she cut me off. That journal had everything. It wasn't just random sketches or poems, okay? It had letters to Dad, stuff I never showed anyone, stuff I can't replace. I told her I'd try to find it, that I'd put up flyers, call pawn shops, even offer a reward. But she just shook her head and laughed bitterly. "You don't get it, do you? It's not about replacing it. You had no right to take it in the first place." That stung. I thought she'd at least understand my intentions. I wasn't trying to steal from her. I just wanted to share her brilliance with someone who'd appreciate it. But she looked at me like I was a stranger. She told me to leave, and she hasn't answered my calls or texts since. I don't think she'll forgive me, and honestly, I don't know if I deserve it. I keep replaying the whole thing in my head, wondering if I was wrong to think it wouldn't matter, that she wouldn't notice. I thought I was doing something good, but now, I'm not so sure. AITA? The sun was slicing through the mist, turning the highway into a hazy blur of light and asphalt. My playlist was running its usual Monday morning track list. A mix of upbeat songs I wasn't in the mood for and slower ones that felt too melancholy. Coffee was lukewarm in the travel mug beside me, the bitter aftertaste lingering as I took a final swig. Just another commute. I was in the middle lane, eyes darting between the dashboard clock and the snaking line of brake lights ahead. Merging was on my mind. I needed to get to the right lane soon or risk overshooting my exit. I calculated the move, scanning for an opening. The car to my right was lagging behind. Perfect. I flipped on my blinker, starting to shift into the lane when the car surged forward, cutting me off. My chest tightened with frustration. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered under my breath. My grip on the steering wheel hardened. Was it really so hard for people to just stay predictable? My instinct was to glance at the driver, to shoot them a look. Not full-on road rage, just a moment of righteous indignation. And that's when I saw her, my wife, beaming like a kid who just pulled off a brilliant prank. Her hand shot up in a wave, the kind so big and exaggerated it belonged in a cartoon. For a split second, I froze, my brain caught between the absurdity of the situation and the rising irritation still pumping through my veins. She had sped up to block me, her own husband, on purpose. Her face lit up brighter, clearly enjoying her handiwork. She expected a laugh, maybe a wave back, but all I could muster was a brief shake of my head before refocusing on the road. My exit was coming up fast, and all I could think about was not missing it. When I reached work, my phone buzzed. Her text popped up on the screen, "Sad you didn't wave back." Frowning face. I stared at it for a moment, a half-smile tugging at my lips despite myself. But I decided to let it slide. She had to be joking. Bazidas, id explain late. The day crawled by in a haze of meetings, emails, and enough small annoyances to match the freeway drama. By the time I got home, I was ready to collapse into the couch and forget the day entirely. But as soon as I stepped through the door, there she was, arms crossed, leaning against the kitchen counter. The same mischievous smile from the morning was gone, replaced with a look I knew all too well. She was hurt, and she wanted answers. "You didn't even wave," she said, her voice soft but pointed. "I was driving," I replied, dropping my bag onto a chair. I couldn't exactly take my hands off the wheel. "Don't give me that," she shot back. "You could have smiled, or nodded, or something." I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my tone even. "You sped up, blocked me from merging. I could have missed my exit or, God forbid, crashed." I wasn't thinking about waving. I was thinking about not dying. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "Don't be dramatic. I didn't block you on purpose. I just got excited when I saw you. It was supposed to be fun." "Fun?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "On a freeway?" She threw her hands up in exasperation. "Yes, fun. You know, that thing couples are supposed to have once in a while. God forbid I try to lighten your commute." My retort died in my throat. The fight was slipping away from the topic of the morning's traffic antics, morphing into something heavier. I could feel it teetering on the edge, that invisible line where the argument would stop being about the wave and start being about us. She took a step closer, her voice quieter now. "You didn't just ignore me. You look annoyed, like I was just another driver in your way." That hit deeper than I expected. I hadn't thought about how it might have looked from her side. Her seeing me in the middle of the chaos, trying to connect, only to be met with indifference. I ran a hand through my hair, the weight of the moment sinking in. "I wasn't annoyed at you," I said finally, my voice softer. "I was annoyed at the situation, at the timing. You caught me off guard." She crossed her arms again, but didn't look away. "It didn't feel like that. It felt like you didn't care." I closed the distance between us, resting my hands on her shoulders. "Ikare, I do, and I'm sorry if it didn't seem that way. But can we agree on one thing? No friwas en anigas. Please." A faint smile crept back onto her face. "Fine, but next time I see you on the road, you'd better wave." "Deal," I said, grinning now. "But you have to promise not to mess with my exit." She laughed, and the tension that had been simmering all evening finally broke. Later, as we sat together on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, I couldn't help but think about how ridiculous it all was. A near fight over a missed wave on the freeway. And yet, in its own way, it felt important. A reminder that even in the chaos of everyday life, commutes, deadlines, the endless grind, we still needed to find ways to connect. Even if it was just a wave. We were standing in the middle of the appliance store, and the dishwasher was glaring at me. At least it felt like it was. Its glossy black surface reflected my skeptical face, making me look like a cartoon villain. Across from me, Oliver was running his hands along its sleek control panel. His eyes lit up like it was the Hope Diamond. "It's on sale," he said, as if I hadn't noticed the aggressively red sale sticker. "And look at this. Third rack for utensils, energy efficiency, ultra quiet. This is it, Sophia. This is the one." I folded my arms. "It's $1,200, Ollie, for something that just washes dishes." Oliver turned toward me slowly, like I had just insulted his firstborn child. "It doesn't just wash dishes. It sanitizes. It whispers. It practically hugs your plates and says, 'You deserve better.'" That's exactly what I'm saying. We don't deserve this dishwasher. We can keep using the one we have. It works fine if you jiggle the start button. And pray. Don't forget the praying, Oliver said dryly. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. This wasn't a dishwasher debate. It was a recurring argument we'd been having since we got married 2 years ago. Oliver was the kind of guy who believed in upgrading life, getting the good things, treating yourself to joy. I, on the other hand, grew up in a house where the thermostat was set to we're wearing sweaters. Spending money on non-essentials made me itchy. And while I agreed our current dishwasher was an annoying relic from the 90s, I couldn't stomach the idea of dropping over $1,000 on something I could technically live without. I pointed at a much cheaper model a few aisles down. This one's $450 and has decent reviews. It doesn't hug plates, but it'll get the job done. Oliver stared at me, incredulous. That thing sounds like a lawnmower. And the racks don't even glide, they clunk. It's like buying a disappointment on purpose. Or it's called being practical, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. We just replaced the tires on your car, remember? That was $700 we didn't plan for. Plus, the wedding fund. He threw his hands up. The wedding fund? We've been slowly saving for some vague someday for ages. How about we invest in the life we're actually living? The word someday hit me like a dart. I knew he wasn't trying to hurt me, but it still stung. The wedding fund wasn't vague to me. It was hope in a jar we'd agreed to fill, little by little, even if it took years. His offhand dismissal of it felt like a dismissal of me. Fine, I said tightly. You want the Cadillac of dishwashers? Get the Cadillac. Just don't be surprised when our honeymoon is a weekend in my parents' basement. Oliver winced. He looked down at the floor, hands in his pockets, and for a moment I thought I'd won. But then he took a deep breath and said softly, "It's not about the dishwasher." I blinked. "What?" "It's not about the dishwasher," he repeated, looking up at me with an expression that was frustratingly gentle. "It's about making our home better. I work long hours, Sophia. I'm tired. I hate coming home and fighting with that stupid thing. This isn't just about dishes. It's about small wins, about making things easier, just once." I was quiet for a moment, letting his words sink in. He wasn't asking for luxury. He was asking for ease, for a bit of grace in the grind of daily life. Still, I felt the knot of resistance tighten in my chest. And it's not about the money for me, Oliver. It's about safety, security. The idea that if we hit a rough patch, we'll be okay because we didn't blow all our savings on conveniences. He nodded slowly. "I get that. I really do. But if we never let ourselves have anything nice now, what's the point of being okay later?" We stood there, staring at each other, the weight of unspoken compromises filling the space between us. I hated how much I loved him in that moment. How much I hated that I understood where he was coming from, even if it clashed with my instincts. Finally, I exhaled. What if we meet halfway? The $1,200 one is too much, but what if we go for something in between? Maybe $700 tops? Oliver raised an eyebrow. The $700 ones barely whisper. I shot him a look. They mutter, and we can both live with muttering. He cracked a smile, small but genuine. Deal. That evening, after the mid-range dishwasher was delivered and installed, we sat on the kitchen floor with beers, watching it run its first cycle. To my surprise, it was quieter than I expected, and Oliver had this goofy, triumphant grin that made me feel a little less bitter about the price. "I get it now," he said after a while. "The saving thing, the wanting to feel safe. I don't want to make you feel like that's not important. And I get it too," I admitted. "The wanting to make things easier. It doesn't feel as extravagant as I thought when I see how happy it makes you." He raised his beer. To halfway, I echoed, clinking bottles. As the dishwasher hummed in the background, I realized that the knot in my chest wasn't resistance anymore. It was something softer, messier acceptance, maybe a reminder that partnership wasn't about winning or losing, but about finding a way to mutter through the mess together. So, we were at the kitchen table when Angela first brought it up. I was flipping through wedding venue brochures, daydreaming about how everything would look under soft summer sunlight. Angela reached over and tapped her manicured nail against one of the photos. "No kids," she said casually, as if she were deciding between chicken or fish for the reception. "Sure," I replied, not looking up. Most of our friends didn't have kids, and honestly, I wasn't too keen on someone's toddler stealing the spotlight by screaming during the vows. It made sense. Then it hit me. Except Max, obviously. I said it like it was self-evident. Max, my 15-year-old son from my first marriage, wasn't just a guest. He was my family, my blood, the kid who taught me how to braid hair when he was 6 because I kept messing up his sister's dolls. Max was my world. The idea of him not being in my wedding? It hadn't even occurred to me as a possibility. Angela's face tightened. Just for a second, but enough that I noticed. "I meant everyone," she said lightly, like she hadn't just dropped a bombshell. I stared at her, trying to process. "He's 15. He doesn't need a babysitter, Angela. He's basically a young adult. It's not like he's going to be running under tables or crying during the speeches. "That's not the point," she replied, her tone clipped. "This is our day, and I don't want distractions. Besides, it sets a precedent. If one kid comes, people will feel like we're playing favorites." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Of course it's favoritism. It's my son. Do you really think anyone's going to complain that the groom's kid is there?" Her expression didn't change. In fact, it hardened. "I just think it's better if we keep it simple. Child-free means child-free." Now, I'm not the type to let an argument fester, so I try to keep calm. I asked her why it was such a big deal. Angela took a deep breath, like she was bracing herself. "I'm not saying Max isn't important to you, but this wedding is about us starting a new chapter. Do you really want to bring your old family into our new life?" That was the moment the air seemed to leave the room. "Old family," I repeated, stunned. "Max isn't old family. He's my son. He's always going to be part of my life." "You know what I mean," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm not trying to erase him or anything, but this is a celebration of us. It should be about what we're building, not what you had before." The conversation spiraled from there. I tried explaining that Max wasn't just some relic of my past. He was my anchor, the reason I'd survived some of the darkest times in my life. Angela countered with logistical excuses, seating charts, potential complaints from guests, aesthetics, whatever else she could think of. But the more she talked, the clearer it became. This wasn't about logistics. It was about territory. Her words stuck with me. "Your old family." I replayed them in my head that night, lying awake while she slept soundly beside me. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Like Max was a placeholder, a chapter 1 should have closed already. The next morning, I called my sister, who had always been my go-to for advice. "Am I crazy?" I asked her. "Is it unreasonable to want Max at the wedding?" Her silence stretched long enough to make me think the call had dropped. Then she sighed. "This isn't about the wedding," she said finally. "She's showing you who she really is. Do you really want to build a life with someone who sees your son as a problem?" I didn't want to believe it. For years, Angela had been wonderful with Max. She'd cheered him on at hockey games, taken him to amusement parks, even helped him shop for a tux for his first school dance. But now I was wondering, had all of that been for show? When I brought it up again, Angela turned it around on me. "You're being controlling," she snapped. "We agreed on child-free, and now you're changing the rules." "This isn't about rules," I said. "This is about my son. If he can't be there, then what's the point of any of this?" She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "Are you really going to throw away our future over this?" Her words hung in the air like a challenge. I thought about Max, about what he'd think if I told him he wasn't welcome at the wedding, about how it would feel to stand at the altar, pretending everything was perfect, knowing I'd chosen Angela's comfort over his presence. And then I thought about what kind of father I wanted to be. Angela and I broke up a week later. She cried, accused me of overreacting, said I'd regret it. But I didn't. The night I told Max the wedding was off, he tried to act cool, like it didn't matter. But I saw the relief in his eyes. We spent what would have been the wedding day at a diner, splitting a stack of pancakes and laughing about how we dodged a bullet. It wasn't the future I'd imagined, but it felt right. Because here's the thing, love isn't just about choosing a partner. It's about choosing the kind of life you want, the kind of legacy you want to leave. And for me, that legacy starts and ends with Max. When I first got the idea, it felt like a stroke of genius. My sister Claire had been struggling. Not the obvious kind of struggling where everyone sees the cracks in your life. She's too proud for that, but the quiet, relentless kind that wears a person down. Her husband had lost his job. Their car had broken down twice in a month, and she was juggling 3 kids under 7. Every time I talked to her, she'd insist things were fine, but her voice sounded like it had lost its fight. So, I decided to do something big. Claire had always dreamed of getting back into painting. She used to talk about it like it was her escape plan, her one day. But life had other ideas. Between the kids, the bills, and everything else, she hadn't touched a brush in years. I figured I could give her that dream back, or at least a piece of it. I started planning in secret, coordinating with her husband Dan. I asked if I could borrow their garage for a few weekends and promised it wouldn't interfere with their space for long. "You're sure she want this?" I asked him, just to be safe. He smiled a little sadly. She talks about painting in her sleep sometimes. Trust me, she'll love it. That was all the confirmation I needed. Over the next month, I turned their dusty, cluttered garage into an art studio. I scrubbed the floors clean, painted the walls a bright, cheery white, and even hung a few cheap string lights to give the place some warmth. I found a secondhand easel, picked out an assortment of paints and brushes, and splurged on a canvas big enough to make a statement. I poured hours into every little detail, hunting down her favorite brand of oil paints, installing a proper lamp for nighttime painting, and even leaving space for a little table where she could put her coffee while she worked. The hardest part was keeping it a secret. I couldn't even text her properly because I knew I'd slip up somehow. Every time I wanted to tell her about a color palette or show her the perfect chair I'd found, I had to bite my tongue. But it would all be worth it, I told myself. Seeing her face light up would be worth every second of secrecy. The big reveal came on a Sunday afternoon. Dan had taken the kids out for ice cream to keep them out of the house, and I led Claire to the garage with my hands practically shaking from excitement. "What is this about?" she asked, laughing nervously. "You'll see," I said, opening the door with a little flourish. She stood there, staring at the transformed space. For a moment, she didn't say anything. I took that as a good sign. And then, to my surprise, she turned to me, her face a mix of confusion and anger. "What is this?" "It's for you," I stammered. "I thought," Dan said, "you want a space to paint again." Her expression didn't soften. If anything, she looked more upset. "You thought I needed this?" she said, her voice rising. "What I need is someone to help with groceries, or to babysit the kids so I can take a nap. Not some vanity project." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. "Claire, this isn't a vanity project. It's your dream. You've always wanted." "My dream," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "My dream is to not feel like I'm drowning every single day. My dream is to have one less thing to worry about. Not one more thing I'm supposed to make time for." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, feeling small and stupid, while Claire's anger shifted into something quieter but no less devastating. "I know you meant well," she said finally, her tone sharp but tired. "But you don't get it. You don't live my life." I drove home in a daze, her words playing on repeat in my head. How had I gotten it so wrong? I thought I was giving her something beautiful, something meaningful, but she'd looked at it like it was a burden. The worst part was, I couldn't even be mad at her. She was right, I didn't know what it was like to live her life. But I'd try to help anyway, and now I'd made everything worse. The next day, I sent her a text. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to overstep." She didn't reply, and I told myself she was busy. But when a week went by with no response, the guilt started to eat at me. I debated calling her, showing up at her house, anything to fix what I'd broken. But every time I picked up the phone, I froze. What could I even say? I'd acted with the best intentions, but intentions didn't matter when the result was pain. Dan texted me a few days later, out of the blue. "She's using the studio," he said. "She won't admit it, but I think it helps. It should have made me feel better, but it didn't. If it helped, why couldn't she tell me? Why was she still angry?" I still don't know if what I did was selfish or clueless or both. I wanted to give her something she'd lost, but maybe I was just trying to feel like a hero. I thought I was listening to her needs, but maybe I only heard what I wanted to hear. Now, every time I look at the photos I took of the studio before the reveal, I feel a strange mix of pride and regret. Did I do something good? Or did I just make everything harder for her? AITA? It started with a bowl of grapes and a couch that sank a little too low in the middle. Ella and I were brainstorming, tossing ideas back and forth like tennis balls, except every time one landed, it exploded. "Okay, hear me out," I said, popping a grape into my mouth. "We rent out that vintage movie theater downtown. You know, the one with the red velvet seats? We'll play her favorite movie, Some Like It Hot. Then afterward, there's a swing band waiting in the lobby for a surprise dance party." I gestured grandly, like I just conjured the Taj Mahal with my bare hands. Ella blinked at me, slowly, like she was talking me off a ledge. "And then what? We just assume my dad's gonna grab a fedora and start belting sing in the middle of the lobby? Jamie, he hates dancing. You've seen him at weddings. He claps offbeat sitting down. Okay, not the dancing, but the movie theater thing. He'd love that, right? Maybe, she said carefully. Or maybe he'd love something quiet. You know, something that doesn't involve 60 strangers gawking at him while he fake laughs his way through social anxiety. I scoffed, grabbing another grape. Strangers? Ella. They'd be his friends. People from the neighborhood, his running group, his old work buddies. You know how he's always talking about how he never sees them anymore. What better excuse to get everyone together? Yeah, she said, drawing out the word like it was a maybe, but he also talks about how much he values his downtime and how stressful big events can be. You remember his retirement party? He practically sprinted out the door when the speeches started. That's because they made it all about his career. This would be fun, laid back. We could even get that popcorn machine he's obsessed with. He's still talking about it from the county fair. Ella frowned, twisting a loose strand of hair between her fingers. You think popcorn machines are low stress? Jamie, you're talking about throwing him into a room full of expectations. Do you know what would actually make him happy? A weekend at the lake. Just family. No crowds, no noise, no surprise. You're the center of attention. Drama. Just him a fishing rod, and maybe a cooler of beer. I started and stopped myself because the truth was I could picture it. Him sitting on the dock, the brim of his baseball cap pulled low, the sun catching the silver in his beard. It was quiet, peaceful, completely unlike the splashy spectacle I'd been envisioning. But it also felt small, too small for a guy like Frank who'd spent his whole life showing up for everyone else. He was the guy who drove 20 miles out of his way to help a neighbor fix a leaky roof, who spent Saturdays mowing the lawn for the widow down the street, who even in his 60s ran the Thanksgiving turkey trot just because it raised money for the local food bank. Didn't he deserve something bigger? Look, I said, leaning forward, I get it. You think he wants quiet, and maybe he does. But when was the last time he actually celebrated himself? Like really let himself be celebrated? This isn't just about what's easy for him. It's about showing him how much he means to people. Ella sighed, the kind of sigh that said she was trying really hard not to call me an idiot. And you think he can't feel that without a marching band? Jamie, you've known my dad for, 7 years? I've known him my whole life. Trust me, he'd rather have one heartfelt conversation with someone he loves than 20 handshakes and a cake he feels guilty about not finishing. I hated when she played the I know him better card, mostly because she was usually right, but not always. Okay, but what if you're wrong? What if he would love it, but he'd never say so because he doesn't want to feel like a burden? You know how selfless he is. He'd never ask for something big, even if it'd make him happy. And what if you're wrong? She shot back. What if he walks in, sees a crowd, and immediately wishes he was anywhere else? Do you really want his memory of this birthday to be wow? They didn't get me at all? We stared at each other, locked in a silent stalemate. I felt like we were standing on opposite sides of a seesaw, each convinced our weight would tip the balance. Finally, Ella sat back and crossed her arms. All right, she said. What's your compromise? Compromise? Yeah, she said, waving a hand. You know, the thing where you meet someone halfway instead of bulldozing them with your type A party planning energy? I rolled my eyes, but a small part of me smiled. Fine. We keep it small, but we make it special. Like really special. What if we do the lake thing, but we invite just a few people? His closest friends. And maybe we bring the popcorn machine, just for fun. Low-key, but thoughtful. Ella tilted her head, considering. Okay, but no popcorn machine? That thing's like a grease fire waiting to happen. Fine, I said. But we're at least getting him the fancy cake. She smiled, and for the first time all afternoon, it felt like we were on the same team. Deal. The next weekend, we piled into the car and drove up to the lake, the trunk stuffed with coolers and folding chairs. Just as we were setting up on the dock, a few of Frank's closest friends arrived, each holding something. One had his favorite beer, another brought his favorite sandwiches from the deli downtown. When he walked out of the cabin and saw us, his face lit up in a way I hadn't seen before. Not flashy or overwhelmed, but quietly joyful, like he'd found himself exactly where he wanted to be. Ella leaned over and whispered, "See? Told you." I grinned and whispered back, Yeah, don't let it go to your head." But as Frank laughed with his friends, fishing rod in hand, I couldn't help but wonder, if I hadn't fought for something a little bigger, would we have even made this much effort? And if Ella hadn't pushed back, Would we have missed the mark entirely? So now I'm left wondering. The first time I realized Mom couldn't manage on her own anymore, it was a crisp autumn afternoon. She had invited me over for tea, and I found her in the kitchen staring blankly at a pot of water on the stove, the burner cold. She looked up when I walked in and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I was going to make chamomile, she said almost apologetically. I just forgot what I was doing. It wasn't the first time something like that had happened. There were little clues, misplaced keys, missed appointments, a loaf of bread stuffed into the dishwasher. My younger brother, Jason, had dismissed them at first. Mom's just getting older. She's fine. But I knew. I felt it. Something bigger was happening. A few weeks later, the doctor confirmed it. Early stage dementia. The word hung in the air like a storm cloud, crackling with unspoken fears. Mom didn't say much during the appointment. She just nodded, her hands twisting in her lap, while Jason sat beside her with his jaw clenched, refusing to meet my eyes. Afterward, we went back to Mom's house and sat around the dining table. The silence was suffocating until Jason finally broke it. "We'll move her into my place," he said firmly. "I'll take care of her." I stared at him, stunned. "Jason, you work full-time. How are you going to take care of her and keep your job?" "I'll figure it out," he snapped, already defensive. "She's our mother. We owe her that much." It wasn't that I didn't want to help. I loved Mom fiercely. But Jason's plan seemed reckless. Unrealistic. I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm. "We should look into professional care. Someone who knows how to handle this, who can give her what she needs." Jason's eyes narrowed. "All right, just ship her off to strangers. That's your solution?" "It's not about shipping her off," I shot back, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "It's about making sure she's safe. You can't just do this on your own. It's too much for one person." Mom, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Her voice was small but steady. "I don't want to be a burden." She looked at Jason, then at me, her gaze lingering. "I don't want either of you to give up your lives for me." Jason reached over and grabbed her hand. "You're not a burden, Mom. You'll never be a burden." I stayed quiet, the words catching in my throat. Jason's love for her was obvious, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was biting off more than he could chew. The next few months were a blur of adjustments and compromises. Jason moved Mom into his spare room, redecorating it to feel familiar. Her favorite floral wallpaper, her quilted bedspread. He dove headfirst into caregiving, waking up early to make her breakfast, driving her to appointments, and coaxing her through the increasingly frequent moments of confusion. At first, it seemed like he was managing, but I started noticing cracks. He forgot to return my calls. His normally spotless house grew cluttered with piles of laundry and unopened mail. When I came over one weekend to help out, I found him sitting on the couch, staring at the TV with dark circles under his eyes. Mom was in the kitchen, trying to pour cereal into a mug. "Jason," I said softly, sitting down beside him. "You can't keep doing this alone." He didn't look at me. "Are you fine?" "You're not fine," I pressed. "You're burning out, and Mom's care is only going to get harder." He finally turned to me, his eyes blazing with a mix of exhaustion and anger. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't wake up every day wondering if I'm doing enough? But at least I'm here. At least I'm trying." The words stung, but I swallowed my pride. "I'm not saying you're not trying. I'm saying you don't have to do this by yourself. We can find a caregiver to help. It doesn't mean we're abandoning her. It just means we're being realistic." Jason shook his head, his jaw tight. "She needs us, not some stranger who doesn't care about her." I wanted to argue, but I could see how much he was hurting. He wasn't just doing this for Mom. He was doing it for himself, clinging to the belief that if he could keep her close, he could somehow hold on to the woman she used to be. Things came to a head one rainy afternoon. I stopped by Jason's house to drop off some groceries and found Mom standing on the porch in her nightgown, shivering and disoriented. Jason was nowhere to be found. My heart pounded as I wrapped my coat around her and guided her back inside. Jason came home an hour later, drenched and frantic, apologizing over and over. He'd run out to grab her medication and hadn't realized she'd wandered out. "Jason, this isn't sustainable," I said after Mom was settled with a cup of tea. My voice shook, but I pushed through. She's not safe like this. We have to do something. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. For the first time, he didn't argue. I didn't want her to think we were giving up on her. We're not, I said gently. But loving her means doing what's best for her, even if it's hard. We finally hired a part-time caregiver a few weeks later. Jason insisted on being there for every shift at first, hovering like an overprotective parent. But over time, he started to relax, realizing that the caregiver wasn't a threat to his bond with Mom. If anything, having help gave him more time to focus on being her son, rather than her nurse. Now, we found a rhythm. Jason still spends most of his time with Mom, but he's no longer trying to do everything alone. And I visit often, sitting with her in the garden or reading to her from the books she loved before the memories began slipping away. Still, I wonder, could I have done more? Did I push Jason too hard, or not hard enough? We both wanted to do right by Mom, but our approaches were so different that it felt like we were speaking different languages. In the end, did we make the right choices? Or did I fail them both by not stepping up sooner? When Lily first told me she wanted to move to Vancouver to start her dream job, I felt my stomach twist. It wasn't the city. I'd always heard it was beautiful, with its glassy buildings cradled by mountains, but the looming shadow of all the unknowns. I'd always believed in scaffolding your life with careful plans. Lily, on the other hand, lived her life like a trust fall, certain the universe would always catch her. "You're going to love it," she said one night, beaming across our tiny kitchen table as we shared a takeout carton of lukewarm lo mein. "It's all hikes and farmers markets and cool little coffee shops. It's like it was made for us." "It does sound nice," I hedged, poking at a sad noodle. "But it's not like planning a weekend trip. We'll have to figure out where to live, what to do with all this stuff, the timing." My voice trailed off when I saw the way she looked at me, like I was killing her vibe. "Babe," she said, sliding her hand over mine. "We'll figure it out. We always do." But we hadn't always figured it out. There'd been a road trip 3 years ago where we ended up sleeping in her car because she'd forgotten to book the Airbnb. And a quick beach weekend last summer that turned into a sweaty disaster when she didn't think to check the weather report. Lily saw those moments as funny stories to tell later. I saw them as preventable catastrophes. I swallowed down my doubts and smiled back, though I felt the beginnings of unease curling under my ribs. A week later, I was hunched over my laptop in bed, a glowing spreadsheet taking up most of the screen. Columns labeled apartment, commute, and cost lined up in perfect symmetry. I was deep in reviews for a pet-friendly building when Lily came in, holding a bowl of popcorn. "What are you doing?" she asked, plopping down beside me. She had this annoying but endearing habit of getting dangerously close to my laptop with greasy fingers. "Trying to make sure we don't end up in a place with roaches or a 40-minute drive to your office," I said, pulling the screen slightly away. She laughed like that idea was absurd. "Let's just wait until we're there. We'll get a feel for the neighborhoods, you know? Meet the city halfway." "I don't think cities work that way," I said dryly, but she was already halfway through her popcorn. Her carefree attitude made my jaw tighten. It wasn't that she didn't care. It was that she believed her charm could smooth over anything. Me? I trusted plans. Plans didn't flake, or get delayed, or decide at the last minute they didn't feel like cooperating. It didn't take long for our differences to start creating friction. One Saturday morning, I suggested we tackle the apartment first, nail it down, then work out the rest. "There's this great place in Mount Pleasant I found," I said, scrolling through the listing. "We can do a virtual tour." "Why don't we just wait until we're there?" she said, stretching lazily on the couch. "We can crash in an Airbnb for a bit and figure it out in person." "Why rush?" "Because in person might mean the good places are gone," I said, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. She shrugged. "It's not like we need a palace. Anywhere can be home if we make it ours." "That's a nice sentiment until you're stuck next to a train yard," I muttered, too low for her to hear. Or maybe she did hear it, because her smile flickered just slightly before she changed the subject. The battle lines were clear now. For every task I tried to streamline, Lily countered with her go-with-the-flow philosophy. When I ordered moving boxes, she said, "Let's not pack yet. Living out of boxes will just stress us out." When I started decluttering, she insisted on keeping things like a chipped mug from college because it sparked joy. Every time I tried to explain why my way was better, she'd flash me a grin, kiss my forehead, and say, "Relax. Trust me." But the real blow-up happened 2 weeks before the move. I'd arranged for movers, triple-checked the details, and mapped out the entire trip to Vancouver. Then Lily announced she'd told her brother we'd store some of his furniture in the moving truck. "Just a few pieces," she said breezily when I confronted her. "Lily, we don't have room for our stuff, let alone his," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Why didn't you ask me first?" "I didn't think it'd be a big deal," she said, crossing her arms. "Why are you making it one?" "Because I'm trying to make this process smooth, and you keep throwing wrenches in it." I snapped, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "Do you even realize how much I've been doing to keep this together?" Lily's face fell. "I didn't ask you to do all that," she said quietly. "Well, someone has to," I shot back. The moment the words left my mouth, I wanted to snatch them back. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she walked out of the room without another word. The next day, Lily came home with Thai takeout and sat next to me on the couch. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me a box of Pad CEW and nudged my shoulder with hers. "I know I can be frustrating," she said finally, "but I need you to believe in me a little. I know I'm not like you. I don't plan everything, but I care. I want this to work just as much as you do." Her words sat heavy in the air between us. "I know you care," I said, my voice softer now. "But I'm scared, Lily. Starting over, it feels so big. Planning is the only thing keeping me from falling apart." She nodded, her eyes earnest. "What if we meet halfway? You can keep your spreadsheets, but maybe we leave a little space for, I don't know, serendipity?" I snorted. "Serendipity doesn't pay the rent." "No," she agreed, grinning. "But it might make life a little more interesting." We moved last week. The apartment isn't perfect, but Lily insists the creaky floors give it character. The kitchen is smaller than I'd like, but it has a view of the mountains that takes my breath away every morning. I still think my way made everything smoother, and she still swears her flexibility saved us from unnecessary stress. The truth probably lives somewhere in between. Now, as I sit surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the smell of takeout wafting through the air, I can't help but wonder, AITA? The door to my daughter's bedroom was slightly ajar, and from the hallway, I could see her sitting cross-legged on her bed, her back hunched. She was staring at her reflection in the tiny mirror she kept on her nightstand, her fingers ghosting over the uneven ends of her ponytail. 2 inches of silky, dark hair were gone, hacked away by cruel hands. I had never known it was possible to feel heartbreak and fury in equal measure. I knocked softly, but she didn't turn. "Hey, sweetheart, can I come in?" She shrugged, a small movement that barely registered, but it was permission enough. I sat beside her, unsure if I should touch her or just sit quietly. It had been this way for days. Silence, tension, unspoken fears filling the house. My husband, Mark, had tried to distract her with her favorite ice cream, new books, even a trip to the park, but she wasn't herself anymore. My bright, confident daughter, gone, replaced by this fragile shell. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked gently. She shook her head, her gaze never leaving the mirror. "They said I was a mistake," she whispered after a long pause. Her voice was so soft, I almost missed it. I bit down hard on my lip, holding back the immediate instinct to tell her she was perfect, loved, wanted. She needed to talk. I needed to listen. "I wasn't even doing anything," she continued, her words spilling out now like a dam breaking. "They just came up behind me in class, laughing. And then snip." She mimicked the sound with her fingers. Everyone laughed, even the ones who weren't part of it. No one helped. The lump in my throat was too big to swallow. "I'm sorry," I managed to say, my voice cracking. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." She finally turned to look at me, her eyes rimmed with red. "Why didn't anyone stop them, Daddy? The teacher was right there." That question haunted me. It wasn't just about the hair or the names they called her. It was about the indifference, the complicity of those who should have protected her. I had done everything I could, or so I thought. Meetings with the school, emails, phone calls. I'd played by their rules, trusting they would step up, and they failed her. I failed her. When I told Mark that night I wanted to take legal action, he didn't argue. Instead, he sighed, rubbed his temples, and said, "It's about damn time." The next morning, I called a lawyer. I laid it all out. The bullying, the taunts about her being adopted, the relentless cruelty that had escalated to physical assault. I expected the lawyer to be clinical, detached, but she sounded genuinely appalled. They cut her hair? That's not just bullying. That's assault. And if the school ignored your complaints, that's negligence. Hearing it framed so clearly, so legally, lit a fire in me. This wasn't just a matter of standing up for my daughter. It was about holding people accountable, about showing her that her pain mattered, that she mattered. Word spread fast. I didn't need to announce our intentions. The school did that for me. The principal called within hours, his tone suddenly deferential. "We've spoken with the students involved," he said. "The bully has been removed from your daughter's class, and we're implementing additional anti-bullying measures." "Too little, too late," I replied, my voice ice. "Where were these measures weeks ago? Months ago?" The next call came from the bully's parents. "We're so sorry for what happened," the mother said, her voice thick with false sincerity. "Our daughter made a mistake. She didn't mean any harm." "She didn't mean any harm?" I repeated, incredulous. "She humiliated my child in front of her entire class. She physically violated her. How is that harmless?" The conversation didn't last long. I wasn't interested in apologies. I wanted accountability. The legal process was grueling, not because of the paperwork or the logistics, but because of the emotional toll. Every meeting, every hearing, every statement dragged us back into the pain of what had happened. But it also brought something unexpected, a glimmer of strength in my daughter. She started sitting in on the meetings, listening as the adults argued over policies and responsibilities. One day, she even leaned over to whisper to me, "Do you think they'll make a rule to stop this from happening to someone else?" "I think they will," I said, squeezing her hand. "Because we won't stop until they do." And we didn't. The school settled, agreeing to overhaul their anti-bullying protocols and implement mandatory training for staff. The bully's family settled, too, though their apologies felt hollow. But the real victory came months later, when my daughter came home from her new school, hair growing back, confidence slowly returning, and told me about a girl she had stood up for. She was getting teased about her clothes, she said. So I told them to knock it off. I hugged her tight, overwhelmed with pride. That's my girl. It wasn't just about the lawsuit or the settlements. It was about showing my daughter that she was worth fighting for, that no one had the right to make her feel small. And in doing so, we taught her something even more powerful: how to fight for herself. When the phone rang that morning, I knew it wasn't good news. Calls from the vet don't come with good news at 8 in the morning. I'd taken Mushu in 2 days earlier after he stopped eating. His normally insatiable appetite for scrambled eggs and tuna water reduced to faint, confused sniffs at his bowl. I figured maybe it was a stomach bug, maybe old age creeping in. He was 15, after all, though he carried himself with the smug entitlement of a cat half his age. "Mrs. Crawford, the ultrasound showed some concerning masses," the vet said when I answered. "I'm afraid it looks like pancreatic cancer. Aggressive." I must have sat in silence too long, because the vet gently asked if I was still there. But I wasn't. The words aggressive cancer rolled around in my head like jagged marbles. "What do we do?" I managed to ask, voice trembling. "There are options," she said, cautious. "Surgery, though it's complex and expensive. Chemo might be a path, but it would require frequent visits, and some cats don't tolerate it well." Or, she trailed off, leaving the other path unspoken but heavy as a dropped anchor. When I hung up, my husband Matt was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. What did she say? I told him everything. The surgery, the chemo, the costs, the odds. The part one left out was the look in Mushu's eyes the last few days. The dullness that wasn't him. Mushu, my fearless ninja, my mischievous little dragon who once swatted an entire rotisserie chicken off the counter and claimed it like a tiny king. Now he looked tired, like life had turned into something he was enduring instead of enjoying. "We can't put him through that," Matt said when I finished. He didn't say it harshly, just matter of fact, like it was the only logical conclusion. You don't know that? I shot back. He might respond to treatment. The vet didn't say it was hopeless. Matt shook his head, exhaling sharply. Claire, he's 15. 15! He's had a good run. But this? Surgery, chemo, he won't understand why we're doing it. He's just going to suffer. Or he'll get better. My voice was louder than I intended, bouncing off the kitchen walls. What if it works, Matt? What if it gives him more time? More time for who? Him? Or you? That stopped me cold. I stared at him, heart pounding, tears stinging my eyes. That's not fair, I said quietly. Isn't it? He replied, just as quiet. Look, I love Mushu. You know I do. But I don't want his last months to be spent in a cone, puking from chemo, terrified at the vet. Is that really how you want him to go out? The thing was, I didn't. The image of Mushu scared and sick made my stomach churn. But neither could I accept just giving up. It felt like a betrayal. Mushu had been with me through everything. College breakups, job losses, the time I got food poisoning and he refused to leave my side, purring softly as if that alone could fix me. I owed him everything. Didn't I owe him a chance? We didn't talk about it for the rest of the day. I busied myself with chores that didn't need doing while Matt sulked in his office. Mushu, oblivious to the battle raging around him, napped in his favorite spot by the window, the sunlight making his orange fur glow. I sat with him for a long time, running my fingers through his fur and whispering, "What do you want, bud? Just tell me, and we'll do it." Later that night, after Matt went to bed, I sat down and started researching. I found forums, support groups, heartbreaking success stories, and equally heartbreaking failures. There were stories of cats who bounced back and thrived, their owners calling them miracles. There were others of regret, where the treatments didn't work, and the owners wished they'd let their pets go with dignity. Matt found me the next morning, still bleary-eyed and hunched over my laptop. "You're still at this?" he asked, not unkindly. I gestured at the screen, at all the stories I'd consumed in the night. I can't just decide for him, Matt. What if it's worth it? What if he's one of the miracles? Matt sat down across from me, his hand resting lightly on mine. And what if he's not? Are we ready for that? To watch him suffer just because we're scared to lose him? I started to argue, but the words caught in my throat. He wasn't wrong, but neither was I. We sat there in silence for a long time, Mushu padding into the room and hopping onto the table like he owned the place. He stared at us, blinking slowly, then flopped dramatically onto his side. "Drama queen," Matt muttered, but he scratched behind Mushu's ears anyway. We decided to try the surgery. It wasn't an easy decision, and it wasn't unanimous. Matt still wasn't sure, and I was terrified. But I couldn't let go without trying, without giving Mushu the chance to fight, to prove he wasn't done yet. The surgery went as well as it could have. The vet removed the tumor, and though the prognosis was still guarded, she was optimistic. The recovery was harder than I'd expected. Mushu was groggy, irritable, and not himself for weeks. There were moments, late nights when he refused to eat, when his legs wobbled beneath him, when he looked at me with something close to betrayal in his eyes, when I wondered if I'd made the wrong call. But then, slowly, he started to come back. The first time he swatted at a toy again, I cried like a fool. The first time he demanded tuna water, Matt rolled his eyes but gave it to him anyway, muttering, "Spoiled brat." Mushu isn't the same as he was before, but he's here. He naps in the sunlight, chases the occasional string, and curls up on my chest at night like always. I still don't know if we made the right decision, and I probably never will. But when he purrs loud in content, I think maybe we... If you asked me a year ago who my closest friend was, I wouldn't have hesitated, Chloe. We've known each other since middle school, bonded over a shared love of bad teen dramas and a mutual hatred of gym class. Over the years, we became that inseparable pair people joked would end up in a sitcom. Chloe and me against the world, with our endless inside jokes and uncanny ability to finish each other's sentences. But if you ask me now, I don't think I'd even make Chloe's top 5. It all started when Chloe began dating Asher. I'll admit, I didn't hate him at first. He was polite enough, charming in that quiet, brooding way that usually makes people a hit at family reunions and a disaster in actual relationships. At least that's how it played out. Within a few months, Chloe was a shadow of herself. She stopped coming to game nights. She was constantly apologizing for canceling plans at the last minute. When we did hang out, she'd jump every time her phone buzzed, fumbling for it like a lifeline. I'd joke, "Geez, what did he do? Implant a shock collar?" And she'd just laugh weakly. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was happening. Asher was controlling her. No, more than that. He was isolating her, turning her into this anxious, smaller version of the girl I knew. I wanted to scream at her, shake her, do anything to snap her out of it, but I knew how these things worked. You can't just tell someone they're in a toxic relationship. They'll defend the person, dig in their heels, and shut you out. So, I waited. I bided my time, trying to stay close enough that Chloe wouldn't slip away completely. And then, about 2 months ago, I saw my opening. We were at her place, watching one of our old comfort shows. She was quieter than usual, curled up in this way that made her seem smaller than I'd ever seen her. Out of nowhere, she said, "Do you ever feel like you're not yourself anymore?" I paused, my heart racing. This was it. My chance. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she said, fiddling with the edge of a pillow. "Like sometimes I feel like I'm just fading. Like I'm not me." I wanted to scream. "That's because Asher's sucking the life out of you." But I played it cool. "I get that," I said. "Sometimes it's easy to lose yourself in other people." She nodded, and I thought, okay, this is progress. But then her phone buzzed, and just like that, she shut down again. After that, I couldn't stand to wait anymore. Watching Chloe disappear in slow motion was unbearable, and if she couldn't see what was happening, I'd just have to show her. So I did what any good friend would do. I meddled. I started with research. Late nights scrolling through forums and articles about emotional manipulation, toxic partners, and how to stage an intervention without alienating someone. But the more I read, the more it became clear that a gentle nudge wasn't going to cut it. Chloe was in deep, and if I wanted to get her out, I'd have to go nuclear. My plan was simple, or at least it seemed simple in my head. I'd gather a few of her closest friends, sit her down, and show her the receipts. The text she'd sent me at 2 a.m., venting about Asher's outbursts. The time she'd called crying because he'd made her feel worthless. The nights she'd shown up late to our plans, makeup smudged and eyes red, refusing to talk about it. I even compiled a list of warning signs of an abusive relationship, just to hammer the point home. The hard part was getting Chloe to the intervention without tipping her off. I told her it was a casual hangout, just the old gang catching up. When she walked into my apartment and saw everyone sitting in a circle, she froze. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice wary. "We need to talk," I said, gesturing for her to sit. Her eyes darted from me to the others, panic flickering across her face. "About what?" "Asher," I said. The room went so silent you could hear the hum of the fridge. Chloe laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Are you serious?" "Chloe," I said, my voice soft but firm. "We're worried about you." She shook her head, her laugh dissolving into something closer to anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "We do," I said. "You've been pulling away from everyone. You're not yourself anymore. We just want to help." "Help," she snapped. "This isn't help. This is what? An ambush? A loyalty test." One of our friends, Aaron, tried to chime in, but Chloe cut her off. "No, I don't need this. I don't need you to sit here and tell me how to live my life." I reached for the list I'd printed, desperate to get through to her. "Chloe, just look at this. Please, if any of this sounds familiar." But she didn't let me finish. "You think you're helping me? All you're doing is proving exactly what Asher says about you." That stopped me cold. "What does he say?" "That you're jealous," she spat. "That you can't stand seeing me happy, so you're trying to sabotage us." The words hit like a slap. Jealous? I was trying to save her, and she thought I was jealous? Before I could respond, she grabbed her bag and stormed out. That was 2 weeks ago. She hasn't answered my calls or texts. Our friends are divided. Some think I went too far. Others think I didn't go far enough. Asher, from what I hear, has doubled down on his narrative that I'm some bitter, meddling puppet master. And maybe I am. Maybe I overstepped, or maybe I was just a wrong messenger. All I know is Chloe's still with him, and I'm not sure if I did the right thing or if I just drove her closer to him. The airport lounge was unusually quiet. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just me cocooned in my own thoughts. I sipped a lukewarm coffee and stared at the boarding pass in my hand. Bier u Brussels. Gotte se elve. I had joked about this trip for years. But now, there was no laughter in it. No mischievous smirk meeting mine as I teased about monks and their one-case beer rule. Just silence. Heavy, unyielding silence. They called me selfish, irresponsible, hell, even reckless. Maybe they were right. The money wasn't supposed to be for me. It was for him. But the cruel twist of life had snatched him away before he could spend it. My brilliant, exasperating boy, gone because some idiot couldn't hand over his keys. And now, here I was, fulfilling a promise I never actually thought I'd keep. The first leg of the flight passed in a haze. I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of the flight attendant's voice and the rustle of snack wrappers. My dreams had been restless, filled with fragments of his voice, his laugh, the sharp click of his camera, always snapping pictures of things most people ignored. "Dad," he'd say, "it's not about the subject. It's about the light." I could hear him still, as clear as if he were next to me. Brussels greeted me with a drizzling rain. It felt fitting somehow. The city was alive in a way I hadn't felt in months. Cobblestones glistened under the streetlights, and the smell of damp earth mingled with roasted chestnuts from a nearby cart. I stood there for a moment, letting the rain soak into my jacket before hailing a cab to my hotel. The first stop on my itinerary was the Abbey. The monks brewed the kind of beer you couldn't find in stores, the kind you had to earn by showing up in person. I parked myself at a long wooden table in the tasting room, a glass of amber liquid in front of me. The first sip was sharp, biting, then mellowed into something rich and complex. I imagined him sitting across from me, rolling his eyes and saying, "You're such a snob, Dad." I laughed out loud, startling the couple next to me. The days blurred together, a tapestry of beer, medieval architecture, and fleeting moments of peace. In Ghent, I found a tiny cafe that served stew in crusty bread bowls. It was the kind of place he would have loved, and for the first time, I pulled out the old leather notebook I'd brought with me. Flipping through its pages, I found a blank one and started to write. "Hey kid, I made it. Bet you didn't think I'd actually do it, huh?" The words spilled out like a dam breaking, tumbling over each other in a rush. I wrote about the taste of the beer, the way the canal water glinted in the sunlight, the street musicians who played violins like their hearts were on fire. I wrote about everything, as if he could read it, as if he were waiting for a postcard back home. But it wasn't until Bruges that I felt it. The moment, the one I'd been chasing since I boarded the plane. I found myself at a quiet spot by the canal, a place where the world seemed to hold its breath. The water rippled softly, reflecting the warm hues of the sunset. I sat down on a stone bench, pulled a bottle from my bag, the rarest one yet, and poured a glass. "To you, kid," I said, lifting it skyward. "To every damn thing you were." My voice cracked, but I didn't care. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable, streaming down my face as I took the first sip. It wasn't just beer anymore. It was memory. It was love. It was all the moments we'd lost, condensed into a single glass. When I got back to the hotel, I opened my bag to find his camera. I hadn't been able to leave it behind. I flipped it on and scrolled through the old photos still saved on the memory card. There he was, grinning in front of our favorite diner, crouched in the grass with a squirrel, mugging for the camera in a terrible Christmas sweater. The weight in my chest eased just a little. On the flight home, I felt lighter. Not happy, exactly, but less hollow. Less like I was floating through a void. Back at home, I sorted through the pictures I'd taken with his camera. Buildings, beer glasses, strangers caught mid-laugh. None of them were as good as his, but that wasn't the point. It was about seeing the world the way he'd taught me, through the light. I took one of the photos, a shot of the canal at sunset, and had it framed. It sits on my desk now, next to his old camera and the leather notebook. Some nights, I flip through the pages, rereading the letters I wrote to him. They're messy and raw, but they're mine. And his. a bridge between us, spanning the gap that death left behind. The money's gone now, every last cent, and I don't regret it for a second. I brought back something far more valuable. The reminder that he's still with me, in every step I take, every joke I tell, every photo I snap. Living isn't about forgetting, it's about carrying them with you, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. The evening was perfect until it wasn't. I'd been dreaming about this night for months, a soft launch for my startup, finally introducing it to friends and family after years of late nights and self-doubt. It wasn't just an app or a business idea. It was the culmination of my everything. I wanted people to see that I wasn't just quirky old Sam with a dozen half-baked projects. This was real. This was it. The event was hosted at a local gallery, small but charming. My logo was projected onto one wall, the tables lined with branded swag bags, simple but sleek. The presentation was set to kick off at 8 p.m. sharp, and as guests started filing in, I couldn't help but feel that mix of excitement and terror that comes with exposing your passion to the people who know you best. Among the first to arrive was Maddie, my oldest friend. She breezed in wearing her signature oversized scarf and carried herself with that effortless confidence I'd always envied. "This place is adorable," she said, handing me a bottle of wine. "Sam, look at you, going all out." Maddie had always been the type who could steal the spotlight without even trying. If I was the awkward one in the room, tripping over my words, Maddie was the magnet that pulled everyone's attention. Still, she'd supported me through every stupid idea I'd ever had, and I loved her for it. The room filled quickly. Old coworkers, college friends, even a few people I hadn't expected to show up. By 8:15, the gallery was buzzing, and I felt a swell of pride seeing everyone mingling and joking, the event humming with energy. At exactly 8:20, I climbed onto a small platform at the front of the room, tapping the microphone to get everyone's attention. My heart was pounding so loudly, I could barely hear myself think. "Hi, everyone," I began, the microphone squealing slightly. "First, thank you all for coming. Tonight means the world to me because..." Wait, Maddie's voice rang out, cutting through mine. "Before Sam continues, I just have to say something real quick." The room turned toward her, every head swiveling like a sunflower to sunlight. She was already climbing up onto the platform beside me, her hand on my shoulder, her smile dazzling. "Oh no," I thought. "Not tonight. I know we're all here to celebrate Sam," she began, her voice syrupy and warm. "And I promise we'll get to that. But I just have to share this incredible news. You guys," she turned to the crowd, her face lighting up. "I got the fellowship." Applause erupted before I even had time to process her words. Maddie had been applying for this ultra-prestigious, practically impossible to get creative fellowship for years. She'd talked about it endlessly, and apparently, the day had come. She beamed, soaking in the cheers, waving her hands in mock humility. I just stood there, the microphone dangling uselessly in my hand, watching as the attention of the entire room shifted away from me and my startup. It wasn't just an interruption, it was an eclipse. My big moment, carefully planned and deeply personal, had been swallowed whole. Maddie turned to me, squeezing my arm like she'd just done me a favor. "Sorry, I just had to get that out." "Go ahead." The crowd chuckled. My stomach twisted. I tried to recover, smiling through the discomfort. "That's amazing, Maddie. Congratulations." The words tasted bitter coming out. I turned back to the crowd, but it was clear the energy in the room had shifted. People were still buzzing about Maddie's announcement, their conversations punctuated with laughter and excitement. I stumbled through the rest of my presentation, feeling like I was shouting into the void. Maddie stood off to the side, chatting with a group of friends, oblivious, or worse, indifferent to the fact that she had hijacked my night. By the time I finished, I was barely holding it together. People clapped politely, but the excitement was muted, perfunctory. Nobody rushed over to congratulate me. Instead, they swarmed Maddie, peppering her with questions about the fellowship, already planning celebratory drinks in her honor. I slipped out to the patio, needing air. The brisk night stung my face, but it was better than the suffocating mix of resentment and humiliation swirling inside. I stared at the city lights, trying to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. "Hey!" Maddie's voice behind me made me jump. I turned to see her leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, her face creased with concern. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yeah, fine," I said, forcing a smile. She frowned. "Are you mad about the fellowship thing?" "Because I didn't mean to step on your toes, or anything. I just figured people would be happy to hear good news, you know? Happy for you." I corrected, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Her eyes widened. "What's that supposed to mean?" I sighed, dragging a hand through my hair. "It means you couldn't even let me have one night. Just one." Her jaw tightened. "Whoa, hold on. I wasn't trying to take anything away from you. I thought we were friends, Sam. Friends celebrate each other. Friends also know when to read the room." I snapped. "This wasn't your event, Maddie. It was mine. Do you know how much work I put into this? How much I needed this to go well?" "I didn't realize this was a competition," she shot back, her tone sharp. "It's not a competition," I said, my voice shaking. "But maybe it feels that way, because with you, everything always turns into the Maddie show." Her face crumpled for a moment, then hardened. "Wow, if that's how you really feel, maybe we're not as close as I thought." "Maybe we're not," I said, the words cutting us both. She stared at me for a beat, then turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the tile. I watched her go, half hoping she'd stop, half relieved she didn't. The rest of the night was a blur of strained conversations and awkward goodbyes. By the time I got home, I felt hollow, the glow of what should have been my proudest moment completely extinguished. Now I'm sitting here, replaying the argument in my head. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I should have just let it slide. But then again, how many times can you let someone take your spotlight before you're allowed to push back? AITA?